feeding more wet food than this can actually harm your cat's health, that sentence probably feels wrong right now. Everything you have read, every video you have watched, every well-meaning cat forum post has told you the same story. Wet food is better, wet food hydrates, wet food protects the kidneys, and most of that is true. But there is a line, a specific measurable line that almost nobody in the pet world talks about. And once your cat crosses that line every single day, the same organ you were trying to protect starts accumulating a silent burden that builds for months before you ever see a single symptom. The mechanism doing this damage has a name. It is called renal phosphorus loading, and if you are feeding wet food without knowing one specific number, it may be working inside your cat's body right now. Here is what makes this so difficult to catch. A cat experiencing renal phosphorus loading does not look sick. They eat normally, they drink normally, they play, they groom, they sleep in their usual spots. Their coat looks fine. Their litter box habits seem unremarkable. There is nothing visible that tells you something is going wrong inside the kidney tubules where the damage actually begins. And the research that documents this process shows that the early cellular changes can be running for 8 to 14 months before a standard blood panel flags anything unusual at all. Most wet cat foods sold in the United States contain somewhere between 200 and 900 milligrams of phosphorus per 100 grams of food. That range is enormous. And where your cat lands within that range every single day determines whether their kidneys are being supported or slowly stressed, regardless of how clean the ingredient list appears on the label. A healthy adult cat's kidneys can process approximately 1,200 milligrams of phosphorus per day before the glomerular filtration rate begins showing compensatory strain. That number comes from research published by the European Society of Feline Medicine, which found that cats fed diets exceeding 1.2 grams of phosphorus per kilogram of body weight daily showed measurable increases in urinary phosphorus excretion and early markers of tubular remodeling within just 12 weeks, not years. 12 weeks of feeding above a threshold most owners do not know exists. And here is the part that genuinely changes how you think about this. The cats in that study were not sick. They had no pre-existing kidney disease, no genetic predisposition. They were healthy adult cats eating what their owners believed was a protective, high-quality wet food diet. The damage was invisible. The lab values were creeping upward. The owners had no idea. Now consider why this is happening in American homes right now, across millions of households where the owners are actively trying to do the right thing. The wet food movement in the United States built real momentum over the last decade for a legitimate reason. Studies from the early 2000s at the University of California, Davis School of Veterinary Medicine confirmed what veterinary nutritionists had been observing for years. Cats fed exclusively dry kibble experience chronic mild dehydration because their thirst drive is biologically calibrated to extract moisture from prey, not from a water bowl sitting beside a pile of dehydrated pellets. The research was solid. The recommendation was reasonable. More wet food, better hydration, healthier urinary tract, less kidney stress over time. That recommendation was correct as far as it went. The problem is it stopped there. The conversation about phosphorus load was never attached to the mainstream message. It stayed in veterinary nephrology journals, in specialty conferences, in the practices of board-certified feline internal medicine specialists. It did not reach the popular pet health channels. It did not appear in the pamphlets at the pet supply store. It did not enter the conversations most general practice veterinarians have during a routine annual checkup, where 15 minutes get split between vaccines weight check and whatever question the owner remembered to bring. So owners did exactly what they were told. They switched to wet food. They increased the amount. They read ingredient labels looking for named proteins and low carbohydrate content. They felt confident. And in most ways, what they were doing was genuinely better than what came before. But nobody told them to look at the phosphorus column, that one missing variable is the gap between almost right and completely right. And in the cat's kidneys, that gap has consequences that do not appear when the cat is young and recovering easily from everything. But 5 years from now, 7 years from now, when the cumulative weight of years of quiet renal stress starts showing up in blood work changes, in shifts in water intake, in the kind of slow weight loss that takes too long to explain. There is a cat named Milo. Milo is a 7-year-old domestic short hair living in the suburbs of Nashville, and his owner, a woman named Karen, had rebuilt his entire diet around wet food roughly 4 years ago after reading about feline hydration. Premium wet food twice a day. Fresh water in a ceramic bowl changed every morning. Annual vet visits. No dry kibble at all. Karen was proud of the changes she had made. Milo's coat looked better within 2 months of the switch. His energy seemed steadier. She told her friends about it. At Milo's most recent annual checkup, the vet noticed his creatinine and BUN levels were trending slightly above the normal range. Nothing alarming yet, but the direction was worth watching in a 7-year-old cat. The vet mentioned a renal support formula as something to consider. Karen was genuinely confused. She had been so careful. She had done almost everything right. What no one had told Karen, including the vet in that appointment, was that the specific premium wet food she had been feeding Milo for 3.5 years listed phosphorus content at approximately 760 milligrams per 100 grams. She was serving him roughly 240 grams each day because the packaging suggested that quantity for his size. The math puts Milo at around 1,800 milligrams of phosphorus daily. Roughly 1.5 times over the threshold his kidney tubules were built to handle comfortably over the long term. Not a poisoning, not negligence. A quiet, invisible accumulation from a food that looked genuinely excellent on every other metric. Milo's story is not unusual. It is playing out right now in homes across the country where the owners care deeply, read labels, spend real money on quality food, and still do not have this one specific piece of information because the mainstream conversation about wet food never included it. The reason the renal phosphorus loading mechanism is so difficult to catch is that the kidneys are built to compensate. The glomeruli and proximal tubule cells that handle phosphorus filtration will adapt their workload quietly for a very long time before their reserve capacity runs low enough to register on a standard panel. This compensation is not a flaw. It is the result of millions of years of evolution designing a predator that could keep functioning under resource stress. But that same capacity for silent compensation is exactly what allows the slow cellular damage to accumulate without triggering visible symptoms until the process is well underway. Research from Cornell University's College of Veterinary Medicine, published in the Journal of Veterinary Internal Medicine, identified subclinical tubular stress in cats fed high phosphorus diets as one of the most underdiagnosed contributors to early-stage chronic kidney disease in otherwise healthy adult cats. The key phrase in that finding is otherwise healthy, not cats with risk factors. Cats like Milo, living in homes where the owner is paying attention, investing in the diet, and doing almost everything the mainstream advice said to do. The gap between almost and completely is one number, a number that takes 30 seconds to calculate once you know what you are looking for. And that calculation, applied to the specific food in your cat's bowl right now, can tell you whether the wet food you have been faithfully serving is working for their kidneys or quietly working against them. Wild cats eating a natural prey diet consume phosphorus in a very different form than domestic cats, eating processed food. In prey tissue, phosphorus is bound to protein in organic compounds that the body absorbs and excretes at a controlled rate. In processed wet food, even premium wet food, a significant portion of the phosphorus comes from inorganic phosphate additives used as preservatives, emulsifiers, and texture agents. Research from the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich found that inorganic phosphate from food additives is absorbed by the feline digestive system at a rate approximately 40% higher than organic phosphate from whole food sources. That absorption differential is never reflected on the label. The phosphorus number listed in the guaranteed analysis treats all phosphorus as equivalent. It is not. This means a domestic cat eating a wet food diet is absorbing meaningfully more phosphorus per milligram listed than their wild counterpart eating the same stated amount from whole prey. It means the threshold calculation has to account for this absorption gap. And it means that feeding based on label numbers alone, without understanding what kind of phosphorus is in the food and how much of it is actually reaching the kidneys, leaves a critical variable completely unmanaged. This is not about switching back to dry kibble. That is the wrong takeaway, and it is not where this is going. Dry kibble creates its own set of problems that are just as real and just as documented. This is about understanding the specific mechanism that makes wet food either genuinely protective or silently harmful, depending on one number and one simple calculation that the mainstream pet nutrition conversation has consistently left out. That calculation and the protocol built around it is exactly what comes next. The calculation starts with your cat's weight in kilograms. If you know their weight in pounds, divide by 2.2 to convert. The European Society of Feline Medicine threshold is 1.2 grams of phosphorus per kilogram of body weight per day. For a 4.5 kilogram cat, that is 1.2 multiplied by 4.5, which equals 5.4 grams total per day. That is the upper edge of what a healthy adult kidney can handle without beginning to show signs of compensatory tubular strain. Now pick up the wet food you are currently serving, find the guaranteed analysis on the label, locate the phosphorus percentage. Most labels list it as a minimum percentage of dry matter or as fed basis. If the label says 0.9% phosphorus as fed, and you are serving 200 grams of food per day, the math is 0.009 multiplied by 200, which gives 1.8 grams of phosphorus daily. For a 4.5 kilogram cat, that puts them at 0.4 grams per kilogram, comfortably under threshold. But if that same label reads 1.3% phosphorus and you are serving 240 grams, the daily load becomes 3.12 grams. Divided by 4.5 kilograms, that is 0.69 grams per kilogram. Still under threshold, but now factor in the inorganic phosphate absorption premium from the Ludwig Maximilian University research. Approximately 40% higher bioavailability than the label implies for processed foods using phosphate additives. The effective load climbs to roughly 0.97 grams per kilogram. Now you are within striking distance of the threshold every single day, and the cat looks completely fine. This is what makes renal phosphorus loading invisible for so long. The numbers are not dramatic, the food is not bad, the math does not produce a crisis, it produces a slow erosion that happens every single meal, every single day for months. Now here is the part of this conversation that almost never happens in mainstream pet content. The pet food industry has known about phosphorus bioavailability differences between organic and inorganic sources in companion animal diets for well over 2 decades. A review published in the journal Nutrition Research Reviews in 2012 documented that inorganic phosphate salts used as food additives are absorbed significantly faster and at higher rates than phosphorus bound in whole protein, and that this difference has meaningful implications for species with high sensitivity kidneys, specifically cats and certain breeds of dogs. That paper was not hidden. It was cited repeatedly in veterinary nephrology literature. It was available to anyone formulating pet food at scale. Inorganic phosphate additives are cheap. They are effective preservatives. They improve the texture of wet food, giving it that smooth, uniform consistency that cats seem to prefer, and that makes the product photograph well. They are listed on ingredient labels under names like sodium phosphate, potassium phosphate, dicalcium phosphate, or simply tricalcium phosphate. Some labels use the phrase natural flavor or mineral supplement as umbrella terms that may contain phosphate compounds. The additives do their functional job well, and removing them would require either accepting a shorter shelf life, changing the texture, or finding more expensive alternatives. None of this makes the pet food companies villainous. They are solving real formulation problems with tools that are available and approved. But the downstream consequence for a cat's kidney tubules, fed this food exclusively for years, at amounts that look completely reasonable on paper, never became part of the conversation that reaches the owner buying the food at checkout. The general practice veterinarian is not hiding this either. The average veterinary appointment for a healthy adult cat in the United States runs between 15 and 20 minutes, according to data from the American Veterinary Medical Association. In that window, the vet is covering vaccine updates, weight assessment, dental check, parasite prevention, and answering whatever the owner's top concern is that day. Renal phosphorus bioavailability in processed wet food is not a topic that fits in a 15-minute wellness visit. It belongs in a nutrition consultation with a board-certified veterinary nutritionist. A resource that costs more money and requires a referral that general practice rarely initiates unless the cat is already showing signs of kidney decline. The popular cat health channels that built audiences on the wet food movement made a genuine contribution by pushing back against the dry kibble default. That shift was and still is directionally correct. Wet food is better than exclusive dry feeding for hydration and urinary health. But the influencer ecosystem that built around that message had no structural incentive to complicate it. The message that drives engagement is clean. Wet food good, dry food bad. A nuanced follow-up about phosphorus load calculations and inorganic phosphate absorption rates does not get the same clicks, so the follow-up never came. The result is a generation of well-informed, genuinely caring cat owners who made the right first move and then stopped one step short of the full picture. Think about what this looks like inside a cat's body in a household with that information gap. The cat eats their wet food in the morning. The protein is digested in the stomach and small intestine. The phosphorus, both the organic fraction from the protein itself and the inorganic fraction from the phosphate additives, enters the bloodstream through the intestinal wall. The inorganic portion clears the intestinal barrier faster and in greater concentration. The blood carries it to the kidneys. In the glomerulus, the first filtration stage, phosphorus passes freely through the filtration membrane into what is called the filtrate, the fluid that will eventually become urine. From there, the proximal tubule decides how much phosphorus to reabsorb back into the body versus excrete. When the daily phosphorus load is within range, this system works efficiently. The tubule cells regulate phosphorus reabsorption through specific transport proteins, mainly the sodium phosphate cotransporter, which responds to signals from parathyroid hormone telling it how much phosphorus the body still needs. When phosphorus levels in the blood are appropriate, parathyroid hormone suppresses reabsorption and the excess is excreted. The system is elegant. When the daily load is consistently above threshold, the parathyroid hormone signaling begins compensating. Parathyroid hormone levels rise to push more phosphorus out through the urine. This chronic parathyroid hormone elevation is called secondary renal hyperparathyroidism, and research from the Waltham Center for Pet Nutrition found that it begins in cats at dietary phosphorus intakes that are only moderately elevated above baseline recommendations, not at dramatically high levels. The body compensates, the cat shows no symptoms. And meanwhile, the sustained elevation in parathyroid hormone is triggering a secondary cascade. Progressive calcification of small blood vessels within the kidney tissue itself, gradual stiffening of the tubular architecture, and a slow but measurable reduction in functional nephron mass over time. This is not a fast process. It is a patient one, and it operates in complete silence in a cat living a comfortable apartment life in 2026, eating food their owner researched carefully, in a home where the water is fresh and the vet visits are annual. Apartment cats and indoor-only cats face a specific compounding factor. An outdoor cat consuming prey gets phosphorus in a biologically integrated form from whole animals and burns far more energy, creating a metabolic buffer that indoor cats simply do not have. The Waltham Center research noted that indoor-only adult cats showed earlier onset of compensatory parathyroid changes than cats with outdoor activity at equivalent dietary phosphorus intakes. If your cat lives primarily indoors, which describes the majority of pet cats in the United States, the threshold is not just a useful guideline, it is a meaningful safety boundary. Here is something that most cat nutrition content never addresses directly. The damage pattern from renal phosphorus loading is not the same for all cats, and two variables determine how vulnerable your specific cat is right now. The first is age. Cats under 3 years old have a greater nephron reserve, which means early compensatory changes create less proportional functional loss. A young cat can run above the phosphorus threshold for longer before damage becomes measurable. This is why the problem almost never gets identified early. The cats experiencing it are past their middle years before lab values shift, and by then the owner has been feeding the same food for years without a single sign of trouble. The second variable is concurrent hydration. A cat who drinks more water, whether from wet food, a fountain, or both, dilutes urinary phosphorus concentration and reduces tubular workload per filtration cycle. This does not eliminate the problem of excess phosphorus load, but it slows the accumulation of damage. This is why the protocol that solves this problem addresses not just how much wet food, but what accompanies it every single day. The three-component solution to renal phosphorus loading is called the PRA method, and it has a specific implementation for each of its 3 steps with exact daily numbers that make the difference between protective and harmful. The components are phosphorus audit, which takes less than 5 minutes once per food rotation, rehydration anchor, which requires 30 seconds and one specific addition to the daily routine, an absorption buffer, a naturally occurring compound your cat's body uses to slow inorganic phosphate uptake that almost no owner thinks to include and costs almost nothing to add. Each component addresses a different point in the phosphorus pathway. Together, they shift the daily metabolic burden from the kidney tubules to a profile that the research consistently associates with long-term renal health, even in cats already in early stages of kidney stress. That is exactly what Chapter 3 delivers. The full PRA protocol, the phosphorus audit with the exact formula, the rehydration anchor with the specific daily target in milliliters, the absorption buffer with the precise amount per kilogram of body weight, and the single most common mistake owners make when they start the protocol that quietly cancels out every single benefit they built, which almost nobody talks about because it only becomes visible if you know what to look for. The PRA method works because it addresses renal phosphorus loading at 3 separate points in the pathway, not just one. Most well-meaning adjustments that cat owners try on their own, switching to a lower phosphorus brand, adding more water, reducing portion size, hit only one point and leave the others untouched. The result is partial improvement at best, and often no measurable change at all because the variable they left unmanaged is the one doing the most damage in their specific cat situation. The PRA method closes all 3 gaps simultaneously. The first component is the phosphorus audit. This takes less than 5 minutes the first time and about 90 seconds every time you rotate to a new food after that. Here is the exact process. Pick up the wet food your cat is currently eating. Find the guaranteed analysis panel on the label. Locate the phosphorus line. It will be listed as a percentage. Write that number down. Now weigh your cat, or use the last recorded weight from their most recent vet visit. Divide their weight in pounds by 2.2 to get kilograms. Multiply their weight in kilograms by 1.2. That gives you their daily phosphorus threshold in grams. Now calculate how many grams of food you serve per day. If you are using a standard 5.5 ounce can, that is approximately 156 grams. Multiply the food weight by the phosphorus percentage on the label, divided by 100. That gives you the raw phosphorus load from the label. Then multiply that number by 1.4 to account for the inorganic phosphate absorption premium established in the Ludwig Maximilian University research. The result is the effective daily phosphorus load your cat's kidneys are actually processing. If that number sits below their threshold, the audit is done. If it is above, you have 2 options. Reduce the portion size until the effective load drops below threshold, and make up the caloric difference with a low phosphorus protein, or switch to a food where the same math produces a safer effective load at the appropriate serving size. A kitchen scale that measures in grams makes this precise. Estimating by eye introduces enough variability to undo the audit's accuracy. Weigh the food for 2 weeks until the correct amount becomes automatic. The second component is the rehydration anchor. The target is 44 milliliters of total daily fluid per kilogram of body weight, which is the threshold at which urinary phosphorus concentration drops to levels that reduce tubular workload, according to the International Society of Feline Medicine. For a 4.5 kilogram cat, that is roughly 198 milliliters of total fluid, including what comes from food. A standard wet food serving of 156 grams already delivers approximately 100 to 125 milliliters. The anchor closes what the food alone does not cover. The specific addition that closes that gap is a circulating water fountain. Research from the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine found that cats offered a fountain increased voluntary water intake by an average of 28% compared to cats with a still water bowl, because moving water smells fresher and overrides the evolutionary caution cats feel towards standing water. Place the fountain at least 3 feet from the food bowl and away from the litter box. Cats are significantly less likely to drink from a water source that shares the sensory space of food or elimination. Change the filter every 3 to 4 weeks. A biofilm-coated fountain has the opposite effect. Cats smell the contamination and begin avoiding it. The third component is the absorption buffer. This is the one almost nobody in the mainstream cat nutrition world talks about, and it is arguably the most immediately protective of the 3 because it intercepts the inorganic phosphate before it reaches the bloodstream rather than managing the consequences after the fact. The compound is calcium carbonate. specifically food-grade calcium carbonate from eggshell powder, which is available at most health food stores and online, has no synthetic additives and is palatable enough for cats when mixed into wet food. The mechanism is straightforward. Calcium carbonate in the gut binds with free inorganic phosphate ions to form calcium phosphate, a compound that the cat's digestive system cannot absorb. Instead of entering the bloodstream and reaching the kidneys, that bound phosphate passes through the digestive tract and is excreted in feces. It is removed before it ever becomes a renal burden. Research from the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine confirmed that oral calcium used as a phosphate binder reduced serum phosphorus in cats with early-stage chronic kidney disease within 6 weeks. The preventive dose for a healthy adult cat is approximately 50 milligrams of elemental calcium per kilogram of body weight daily, roughly 1/4 of a teaspoon of pure eggshell powder for a 4.5 kilogram cat, mixed directly into the wet food at each meal. The cat will not taste it. Phosphate binding begins in the stomach and small intestine within minutes. Do not use calcium supplements formulated for humans without verifying the absence of vitamin D additives. Excess vitamin D is toxic to cats. Food-grade eggshell powder is the simplest and safest source. Grind clean dried eggshells in a small coffee grinder, measure 1/4 teaspoon, mix into the food. Together, the 3 components of the PRA method work as a system. The phosphorus audit eliminates the hidden excess before it enters the bowl. The rehydration anchor dilutes what does enter the bloodstream and reduces the concentration per filtration cycle. The absorption buffer intercepts the most bioavailable fraction before it can reach the kidneys at all. Each component is necessary. None is sufficient alone. That is exactly why single variable adjustments, just switching food, just adding water, just reducing portion size, produce inconsistent results. The mechanism has 3 entry points. The protocol closes all 3. Now for the mistake, the error that invalidates everything you just built, and the one that almost nobody catches until they notice the protocol is not working. The absorption buffer only works when the calcium carbonate is present in the gut at the same time as the inorganic phosphate. Calcium does not stay active in the digestive tract for hours waiting to bind phosphate. The binding is a contact reaction. The calcium needs to be in the small intestine alongside the phosphate from that specific meal. If you mix the eggshell powder into the morning meal but give a high phosphorus treat in the afternoon, that treat's phosphate load moves through the intestine with no calcium carbonate present to intercept it. The afternoon phosphate absorbs freely. The morning buffer did nothing for the afternoon load. This error happens most often when owners use the absorption buffer correctly at the main meal and then give fish-based treats, deli meat scraps, or commercial cat treats between meals as rewards or enrichment without checking the phosphorus content. Commercial fish treats are some of the highest phosphorus foods available in a typical cat household. A small handful of commercially produced salmon or tuna-flavored treats can deliver a phosphorus load that approaches or exceeds the entire main meal depending on the brand. The buffer is not active for those treats. The treats bypass the entire protocol. The fix is either to add a small pinch of eggshell powder, roughly 1/8 of a teaspoon, to any high phosphorus between meal food, or to shift toward treats that are naturally lower in phosphorus. Cooked plain chicken breast, for example, which has a significantly lower phosphorus profile than fish-based options and can still be offered in the same small quantities as commercial treats. Check every treat in your home right now. Find the phosphorus content if it is listed, or look for whether fish is the first or second ingredient. If fish appears as the primary protein in a treat you give multiple times a day, that treat is the gap in your protocol. It is not a minor detail, it is the variable that determines whether the PRA method produces the long-term kidney health protection it is built to deliver or simply adds effort without changing the outcome. Here is what you can expect if you implement all 3 components correctly. Within 10 to 14 days, most owners notice their cat's urine becomes less concentrated and less strongly odored. That is the earliest visible sign that the rehydration anchor and the absorption buffer are producing their intended effect at the kidney level. Over 6 to 8 weeks, cats whose tubules have been under sustained low-level stress often seem slightly more alert after meals and more willing to initiate play. This is the downstream behavioral expression of a body spending less metabolic energy compensating for excess renal workload. It is not a cure for existing damage. It is what normal looks like when the daily burden is finally within range. If your cat already shows elevated creatinine or bung in recent blood work, the PRA method is not a replacement for veterinary care. Share the protocol with your veterinarian and ask about target phosphorus levels for your cat's current kidney function stage. The research supports these components as adjuncts to standard renal care, extending protection into the daily routine where a clinic appointment cannot reach. One last thing, if this video changed the way you think about the wet food you have been faithfully pouring into your cat's bowl, drop the word kidneys in the comments right now. Not as a diagnostic, not as an alarm, just as the signal that you now have a piece of information most cat owners will never receive. You are part of a smaller group that understands the mechanism, not just the headline. That matters for your cat. If you want to keep understanding your cat's biology at this level, subscribe to this channel. Every video here is built on the same principle. The science that actually explains what is happening inside your cat, not the simplified version that fits on a pet food label. The next video covers something that affects nearly every indoor cat eating wet food and that almost no one connects to the food itself until it is already a problem. It starts with a behavior most owners dismiss as personality. It is not personality, it is the earliest external signal of a specific internal imbalance, and once you know what it looks like, you will never misread it again. Your cat is eating right now, or they will be soon. What you do with what you just learned is the difference between the diet you have been giving them and the one their kidneys were built for.